there. I don't know why I couldn't see it last time, but okay. So we're going to talk about zero punch. So I was talking with a company. I was visiting a company. I started talking about this, and one of the guys jokingly said, "Chasing unicorns." And I thought that was a great, sort of subtopic, because at least in part, I never would have believed, I wouldn't have been sitting here talking about this 15 years ago. In fact, I remember very distinctly hearing somebody say, we're going to do zero punch. And I pretty much told them it was impossible. And so what I've learned is it's not impossible. It's not easy. And it takes maybe a lot of concentration to make it happen. And so I'm going to give you what I've learned from other people. I've had very little experience with doing this myself, except for back in 2011, I did bathroom installations personally, not just, managed it. I personally was on site doing them for a kitchen and bath company. And I did practice zero punch during that time and never had to go back. Now, these were bathrooms. Obviously, a bathroom is a little bit of an easier finish, I guess, than a whole house remodel or something major like that. But the concepts are basically the same. You just have to pay attention a little bit longer with bigger projects. All right, so I like to look at things from the situation of saying, what's the real issue behind everybody creating a punch list? And, we can talk about, well, it's just the tradition of the industry, the magazines say it, architects say it, everybody says it. But in my opinion, the real issue is right here. The whole concept of making a list allows there to be a list. Let me just get rid of that. But I just want to talk about this for a second. So the idea is that if there was not going to ever be a list, you would have two options. One, try to slip something by the client, which you probably wouldn't do, or you just make sure everything got done because there isn't going to be a list to put it on. And so the idea that there's going to be a list, and the way I like to illustrate this is, I don't know how many times I said it, and you've probably said it, oh, don't worry about that. We'll just put it on the list. And so that becomes the mental thinking. So there's a lot of things that go into that. Sometimes it's things just don't get done. Sometimes people leave things and they don't ever tell anybody, but they left it for somebody else to finish up. In some cases, they're just not done properly, right? So whether it's because somebody doesn't know how or because we just didn't take enough time, sometimes it's the trash and the tools that get left behind. But right here is probably the most critical problem with the way we typically do punch lists. And so it starts at the sales process, where a salesperson, thinking that they're setting everybody up for success, says something like, and when we get to the end of the project, you'll walk through with our project manager and make a list of all the things you'd like for us to finish up, and we'll finish them, and that will be the end of the project. Right there, the client has been told, you're going to be responsible for making this list. And that's certainly the image that we have in the media, is that they say, look, don't pay the last bill until you make a list for the contractor. And then I think another problem that we have is coupled with this other one, but it's the crutch of what I call the crutch of the warranty. In other words, we say, okay, we're going to make this list, and then anything you find after that will be taken care of under warranty. So it sounds good, but just think of the image that portrays to the client. Do they really want us coming back and taking care of warranty? Yes, if they absolutely have to, but I really don't want you coming back to take care of stuff. I want you to deal with it before you leave. And so what are they doing? They're creating a punch list, and then another punch list, and then another punch list. and another punch list because they don't want you to have to come back in 6 months or a year to deal with something that could have been caught up front. And so I guess what I really want to impress on you is this idea that what you want to try to develop within your company is the reality, not even the concept, but the reality that says, when we get to the end of the job, we are not going to make a list with the client. We're going to do something else. Now, you have to work on it. It doesn't mean no lists at all, but it does mean some deliberate action on your part. So the other thing I like to look at is like, why do we end up with a list in many cases? So one of the reasons is that, excuse me, I might sneeze here. One of the reasons is that I think carpenters, project managers, we're ready to move on. There may be a little bit of ADHD in us where it's like, you know what, I've been on this job for 4 months. I'm ready to get on to something new. One of the other things that happens, and particularly right now, as there's a lot of work going on, quite often that person responsible for finishing that job gets moved to another job to start it, and maybe somebody with less experience is left to try to finish up, or maybe nobody is left to finish up. And again, I've heard this, you know, hey, can we pull you off the job? Are you done where we can pull you off and start another job? Yeah, I'm all done. Well, no, you're not. There's like 10 items left. And so maybe it's a communication thing as well. Sometimes it's not working to a standard. Maybe there isn't a standard. Maybe there isn't a definition of how that should look. One of the big issues is just not being careful in the way we inspect. And so, again, this is all my experience, right? You stand in the middle of a room, you look around, and you go, wow, this looks good. Well, that's not the way a client is going to experience the inspection, right? They're going to walk up to stuff. They're going to run their hand across it. Oh, and the other thing here is a number of people have that little booklet that was put out by NAHB that says construction standards. And one of them, I think, is acceptable drywall work is you can't see the blemishes in normal light from 6 feet away. Guess what? Your client's not going to stand 6 feet away. They're going to stand 4 feet away, 3 feet away. They're going to put their hands on it, and they're going to shine bright lights on it, right? So just be aware that you need to inspect the way the client inspects, okay? Otherwise, you end up with trouble. Lack of supervision on subcontractors, you know, like what do we need to check with our subcontractors before we close up, before they leave the job? And then this one right here is a particularly dangerous one. You know, I just don't have time. We are swamped. We are pushed. I just don't have time to really carefully inspect. Well, guess what? You're going to save that time if you do it now. Or the other way to look at it is down the road, at the end of the job, you're going to use every bit of that time, probably more, if you don't take care of it now. So what's the impact? I think the impact of a punch list process is seen sort of in the, I don't know, the party that your clients go to when everything's all over. So a potential client comes up to your client and says, hey, how'd that project go with Falcon Remodeling? That was my little company a few years ago. And the client says, pretty good, but, and then you can actually just put the ... right after that but. If the client says, but, you know, it took 3 weeks to finish up a list of 5 items, or it took, you know, 2 weeks to finish up one little thing. The potential client, that's what they hear. They hear the but this, and they don't want to experience that. They don't want to have that happen. And so they're maybe probably not going to call you. And so again, this is so critical with your trades, for them to understand how important this is. And so it's a customer satisfaction impact. You know, some companies kind of dismiss it and they go like, but the clients are delighted. Well, it wasn't a great experience for them. The other thing that plays in here is just, what about the money? You know, and do the math sometime. You know, that door stopper that was missed in all the other inspections, what would it have cost if someone had caught it during the construction phase? Now stop and think, what does it cost to get it done in the punch list phase? And you'll probably see it's 2 to 3 times the cost to do it as a punch list item than if we had caught it from the very beginning. All right, so here's how to do it. I think I've got about 9 of these things, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So number 1, a careful inspection of all the work that's done. This is particularly important with your trade contractors, but also very important with your in-house work. And we get away from this derogatory term of babysitting. It's not babysitting. You know, you are a supervisor or a business owner or a manager. And so you need to be inspecting and supervising the work that's being done for you. And I've heard these very statements. I pay these guys top dollar. Why do I have to inspect their work? You would think they would know what they're supposed to do or something like that. One of the challenges right now with all the work that's going on is that your trade contractors are hiring people that are new to them, that don't necessarily know the standards that you work to. And so new people on jobs aren't always going to bring things to the standards that you have. And so you need to be inspecting at the various stages, rough in, finish, you know, completion, all those different things. I'm going to share with you a checklist in a little bit that might help with that. But then obviously you need to inspect really carefully at the end. And like I suggested, you know, sometimes that final look through is so general that we don't catch the things that are obvious. And you've had this experience just like I've had. You walk through, you think you're ready. The client walks in and points at something and you go, oh my goodness, I missed that. And the reason you missed it is because you really weren't careful in your inspection. It was true for me. I know it's true for others as well. So one of the things, and I mentioned the checklist in a few minutes, but one of the things that I think would be really helpful in inspecting would be to have checklists. And then that final checklist has things like window hardware. And so instead of just kind of generally looking at the window hardware, in order to check off that list, you would go and look at every single window in that house. Is the hardware intact? Does it have paint on it? You know, does it function properly? Check. Window screens. Are they all intact? Are they all installed? Check, check. You know, and then door stoppers. And the reason I bring that up is I don't know how many times a door stopper ended up on my completion list. Are all the door stoppers in? Are they functioning properly? You know, the big things aren't going to be typically the problem. It's those little things that fall into that list. So very, very careful inspection. So the second thing is finish tasks as you go. Now, if you're a manager listening in on this, you need to get your people to think about finishing up while they're on it or before they leave the job site. So one of the challenges that happens for your production team is when they're on site, you might call them up and say, hey, I've got another job for you to start on Monday. Are you going to be ready? Or maybe just, I've got another job for you to start on Monday. They say, okay, I'll be there. They have a tendency not to say, hey, but I want you to know, Paul, that I won't be done where I am right now on Monday. So do you want me to just leave everything? And many times the business owner will go like, no, I mean, if you're not done, I'm not going to pull you off. Or can you convey that list to somebody else? But making sure that tasks get finished, because if you don't, they quite often get left and aren't picked up until they get on the list, okay? So I'm an advocate for some overtime to make sure that things get done and aren't left for the next person. Number 3, and this is probably one of the most important things you can do or you can have your team do, is make lists as part of what they do. Now, the reason I'm so high on this is one of the ways that I was able to do those 9, I think I did 9 bathrooms for another company here in Rhode Island, and then walk off the job at the end of the job, the last day that was scheduled, with the final check in hand. So in other words, we gave the client a schedule. We told them, set aside a little bit of time on this last day for our walkthrough. And we actually did that in many cases 6 to 8 weeks before the job ever started. So the schedule was made, we waited for the cabinets to come in, then we started the project. And I will tell you that I hit every single one of those schedules on that final day and walked out with the final check. Now, again, a bathroom's a little different, but I can make that, that switch over. So the way that I did this was I had what I call the schedule list. So rather than have a Gantt chart for a schedule, I took the 2.5 week process of a bathroom, or even 3 weeks of the bathroom, and I divided everything that had to be done on that job out into days. So I would literally take the scope of work and cut and paste it first day, second day, third day, fourth day. And then as other things came up, which they do, I would add them in onto one of those days. And so as I worked through the job, I made a note of every single little thing that had to be done. And so when I got to the end of the job, everything I had to do was on that list. And so it became my ongoing completion list, okay? Now, the way this works for your bigger projects is you literally, you might go through your job. I think each week has a schedule list, but you might go through your job working from a Gantt chart. But when you get within, 3 or 4 weeks before the end of the job, it's a really good idea to say, okay, lead carpenter, project manager is just going to take 2 or 3 hours one day, and they're going to make a list of every single little thing that has to be done in order to finish this job, and start thinking about it from, if I hit all of these deadlines, if I hit like day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, then we're actually going to hit that job at the end with everything done. So here's an actual example of one. This case was not my bathroom, but I decided I couldn't share their name. But this is the first few days of an actual schedule that I used for a bathroom. And again, if you do this with a big project, maybe this starts with, day 100 and goes through day 130 or something like that. But it works the same way. Demo, everything that had to be done Tuesday. Plumbing rough, what am I going to be doing while the plumber's roughing in? Wednesday, electrical rough, more of my work. And then of course it went on from there. Now, unfortunately, this is not the same job. In fact, I apologize, I couldn't find it. But what I ended up with on that last day when I walked through with the client was a completion list that included everything that I knew of that had to be done. And I would literally type it up the night before. I would hand it to the clients when I met them in the morning to do the walkthrough. And you'll see down here at the bottom, number 7 and 8. And I would say, here's all the things I have to do. And I included everything that I could see. And if there's anything else you see, just let me know and I'll put it on this list. And like I said, anything that I added was something that I could take care of that day. It wasn't like, we got 6 weeks to wait for it. But I walked out of the job at the end of the job with the last check. And I had to go back for 2 jobs. One was solid wood doors where the panel shrunk and you ended up with that little line. I went back to touch that up. And another one was the door was sticking for some reason, and I went back and planed it off. Probably didn't have to. Probably would have become all right once winter hit, but I went back and planed it off, and then they actually painted it. They had the paint there and took care of that. But this is one of the ways that I avoided, having to go back and take care of other items. All right, so I mentioned the checklist a couple of times. Again, the checklists become a tool for focusing your attention. If you use a lot of subcontractors, you can actually use this to make sure that they know what your standards are. If you do a lot of in-house stuff, it'll cross over between the two. And so it helps focus attention, and it helps make sure all items are addressed. And the other cool thing about it, it can become a training tool. When you hire a new lead carpenter and you give them a series of checklists, it helps them focus immediately on what are your standards for work being complete. Now I have a whole set of these checklists. And again, I apologize because when I was a production manager, I never had time to make the checklist. As soon as I got out and became a consultant, I had time to make the checklist. So, but here's the way I looked at it. There's something that has to be done before the electrician starts their rough in. And I don't know how many times the electrician called me and said, hey, do you have a cut sheet or a spec sheet for the stove? You know what? If I looked at my checklist, it would be on site. It would be hanging up right where the stove goes. Hey, where's the HVAC unit outside gonna go? Oh man, it's not on the plans. Almost never is on the plans, right? If I'd have taken the time, I would have been able to make sure that that was all set up. Our temporary handrails in place. Is the job clean? Is it watertight? Okay. Then the second part of this is just what am I going to inspect when the job is all done? So before they leave the job, I'm going to inspect. Now, not every job has home theater and audio, so maybe it doesn't make it into this checklist, right? And then all the other things, like maybe it's not even a kitchen. So the checklist for this job isn't going to have all the stuff for a kitchen. And then there's some standard boilerplate information that we have over here. You'll notice here, I've got a sign off for the lead carpenter or the project manager and a sign off for the electrical contractor. One of the things you can do with this checklist is you make this sign off contingency for getting paid for the rough in. So they make sure that they've checked everything and that it's ready to go. Okay. So checklist, a great book. The Checklist Manifesto has some great information on making checklists and things like that. But it's just a great way to make sure that everything gets done the way you want it to before they leave the site. I don't know how many of you have ever had this challenge with your punch list of you start walking through and you notice all the plates are crooked on the, all the electrical plates are crooked on the devices, right? Receptacles and switches. And so you call the electrician and say, you got to come back and fix all these plates. And he or she says, hey, when I left, they were all straight. Well, the checklist would make that clear. Yes, they were, or no, they weren't. So what happened? The painter took them all off to paint, put them back on, and they weren't straight. So whose responsibility is that? It's the painters, okay? So the checklist thing would help eliminate some of that he said, she said sort of stuff that goes into almost every project. Number 5, use informal completion walkthroughs. Now, the way that I came up with this idea is I thought about the fact that sometimes clients see things that we just do not see, okay? And so, and I like this funny, crazy example of you've done this amazing tile shower. It's just absolutely gorgeous. The client has a little sticky note on one, 3x8 tile in the wall tile, and they look at you and they say, that tile is a different color than all the other ones. And you just can't believe that the tile company put a different colored tile in the box with all the other tile. And as far as you're concerned, it's exactly the same. The client looks at it and says, you know what? I've got $20,000 that says that tile is going to be replaced. So when do you want to find that out? Do you want to find it out at the end of the job when everything's been all cleaned up? or do you want to find it out beforehand? So the idea here is about 80% of the way through the job. And again, if it's a 3-month project, that's about 3 weeks out. You walk through with the client. Now, the key here is that you come to the walkthrough with the client with your list already made. And so you have everything on that list that could possibly need to be done, even all the obvious stuff. Now, you tell the client, I'd like to walk through with you, show you what we've got to finish up before the end of the job. And if there's anything you see that I haven't pointed out, please point it out so that I can deal with it quickly and get it out of the way. So when we walk through in the final walkthrough, there will be no list. You see the expectations that we're setting there? That's the expectation. So you want them to tell you right up front. So what you do is you do that 1 week. You put anything they show you on that list. Now what? The next week, you walk through with the same list, but now you've started crossing stuff off because things are getting done. If you can cross off the stuff that the client pointed out, you're golden, because what? You're paying attention. They don't have to bug you about that, right? So what you do is you do this for 2 or 3 weeks, and boom, by the time you get to the end of the project, you truly have taken care of everything that they see, everything that you see, and the job is really, really done. Number 6, several sets of eyes. And I don't know if you're familiar with, I don't even know what the product is, but familiar with the commercials where the woman's standing in the kitchen and, you know, it goes something like, what you smell is this, but what your friends smell, and this dumpster appears. And so there's obviously a smelly odor in the kitchen. And then they talk about how you get blind to where you are. And that's very, very true for us. And so a lead carpenter or a project manager that's been working on a job for 3 or 4 or 5 months, they get what I call job blind. And so they need a second set of eyes. So one of the big things that's come out of our project production manager roundtables with Remodelers Advantage is this idea of a peer walkthrough. So if you use lead carpenters, the lead carpenter for a job invites another lead carpenter over to do a walkthrough and point out things that need to be on the completion list. Now, this is obviously a couple of weeks before the end of the job, but it's a way for the lead carpenter on the job to get somebody else's eyes on the job. One of the companies on Cape Cod that's been very successful at doing this, the lead carpenter makes a list, the production manager comes on the site, does a walkthrough, helps make the list, the salesperson owner of the company comes on, makes another list, and then after all that, they walk through with the client to look at how beautiful the project is. So they won't do a walkthrough with the client till all 3 people have made a list and they're actually completed, okay? And that does it very well. Some companies, the owner's spouse who may not work in the company, but obviously has a vested interest. And then I put the previous client on there just for laughs. You know, I don't know anybody that's doing this, but I thought, you know, if you have a client that just loves you, wants to help out, and has some time, you know, and they appreciate that gift card you give them every time for a bottle of wine or coffee or whatever it is, then maybe somebody like that could really help you get that list narrowed down to what's really, really important. All right, number 7, be realistic on completion times. And this really just comes out of the fact that a lot of people set their walkthrough with the client before there's any chance they'll be done. And it usually is because they get a draw at that time. I just finished a meeting with a company last week where when I'm talking with everybody about they were having trouble closing out jobs. And when every time I talk with somebody in the company about it, they told me about substantial completion. And what I decided was that they put so much emphasis on substantial completion when they got a big paycheck that everybody just dropped their guard after that substantial completion, even though there was always 2 or 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 things that had to be done. And so what I will tell you is just be realistic. So, and one way you can do this is when you do that list of things that have to be done, just start putting time frames on those lists. This task will take one person 2 hours. This task will take 2 people 3 hours. So that's 6 total, right? So you go down through and you add up all those hours that it looks like it'll take, and then you spread those out over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then you tell your client, okay, realistically, our final walkthrough will be this date, because you have a good idea that the job can actually be finished in that time frame. And so you don't want to set that walkthrough time with the client at a time when it is impossible for you to actually finish. Because as soon as you start making a list of obvious things with the client, they start, distrusting that you're going to actually follow through. So schedule that walkthrough, the final walkthrough, at a time that's very, very realistic for the fact that you will be all done. Now, another one of the things that's come out of our podcast, and this was done with a production manager from Ottawa, Canada, and he did a thing with us on Zero Punch, and I would encourage you to do that. It's like episode 5 or 6. It's way back, back a couple years now. But one of the things that he pointed out was that one of the ways that they got to Zero Punch, or got very, very close, was that during the weekly meeting with the client, the project manager would be continually asking, like, is there anything you want us to address? And I just put a couple of different ways that you can ask this question on the slide here. So just, is there anything you are concerned about that we may not have seen, or that you just want to point out to us? Is there anything we can do to make this a better experience for you? Does anything catch your eye that we may have missed? So just developing for your project managers and your lead carpenters, like 10 or 12 different ways to ask the client in regular conversation before we get to the end of the job, is there anything that we are missing? Because we miss stuff. We're imperfect, and we don't want to just pretend like we're perfect, but go ahead and do that. So I think that's another one of those big keys that you want to be working on with your team. And then the last slide here for the actual 9 is change the name. If you continue to use punch walkthrough or punch list walkthrough, the client will always associate that with them making a list. That's what everybody calls it, so that's the thing. So again, the company in Ottawa that I used in the podcast, they called the last walkthrough with the client a celebration walkthrough. In other words, the context was, we are not walking through and making a list at this walkthrough. We're going to take care of everything on everybody's list before we do the walkthrough. What we're going to do in the walkthrough is we're going to celebrate this amazing project. Now, the way that I got to something like this was I bought a new car. I don't buy new cars very often. I bought a new car about 3 years ago. It was in February. I got done with all the hassle of, sign this paper, sign that paper. I had a check in hand for what they needed. And, I wish they'd just take the check and say, here's your car. But anyway, the salesperson walks me out to the car. Of course, they've washed it. And he opens the door for me and hands me the key, and I hop inside. Now, he walks around to the passenger side and hops inside with me. Here is what he did not do. He did not hand me a roll of blue tape and say, hey, Tim, everything you don't like, put a piece of blue tape on it and we'll fix it before you drive the car home. What did he do? He hopped in and he said, in effect, you look good sitting in that seat. and here's how you operate your new car. And it was good. It was a great experience. And so that's the kind of the idea that I'm looking at for this final walkthrough. You're going to walk through, help show the client how to operate that new stove that they've never had before. Show them how to operate that new microwave convection oven and that sort of thing. Talk to them about some of the things you don't put down the garbage disposal and, you know, those kinds of things that they may not know, and celebrate this amazing project that they have. Now, again, going back to my bathrooms kind of thing, I didn't want to go back for the celebration walkthrough, right? I wanted to have that final meeting with the client on the last day of the job. And that's why I would bring the list with me and then encourage them to talk to me about what else they saw. And then I would finish it before the end of that project. All right. So just in case you want to kind of take a, talk about this with your company, just get everybody together and say, like, what are the things that causes the punch list in our company? What do you think we can do about this? Do you think we can actually hit 0? Or do you want to shoot for 4 or 5 to start with and then work our way backwards? Of all the things that, we talked about in this presentation, what are some of the things that we can actually do? What do you think the impact on our clients will be if we can actually make this happen? And who else needs to be involved? Like the clients, like trade contractors, like suppliers, all those kind of people. And how do we get them engaged? Now, the companies that have made this happen, going from the traditional punch list experience to the 0 punch, they tell me it takes about a year to get everybody engaged and get everybody working on it. And so don't get discouraged, after the first one. Don't, feel like you failed because it doesn't just miraculously happen, but go ahead and, start putting some of these things into place and work towards getting to that. Now, let me just say a word about what about stuff that was back ordered. And so one of the challenges, and again, particularly now, as we're in this, it's hard to get some stuff. One of the things that I think you want to do is start really planning ahead for special order items. So in other words, don't wait the traditional lead times for some of these things. You want to get with your suppliers and find out what's going to be back ordered and what's not going to be back ordered. If it's going to be back ordered, talk to your client about possibly picking something else. If not, talk to your client about whether they want to start the project or not, and then say, okay, we can do this, but this won't be finished at the end. Everything else will be done, but this won't be finished. We actually had to do that on one of the bathrooms that I did with Rhode Island Kitchen and Bath, because the tile was being shipped in from Italy and it wasn't going to be here for whatever. And so we got the tile backsplash, not the shower. The shower was going to be all done, but the backsplash behind the vanity. We got everything else done. The mirrors are in place, light fixtures. We just had to wait for the tile. And then the tile guy went back and took care of that as soon as it came in. So that's the idea. The other thing is, if you forget to order something and all of a sudden now it's 3 weeks and you're not quite done, you got to find another solution. And, it may cost you more to get it overnight shipped, but find a way to make that happen. You bear responsibility for that and then actually make that happen. Now, again, that's something that did happen at Rhode Island Kitchen and Bath with me. And you know what? They got on the horn and their supplier said a fixture was going to take 3 weeks. They got on the horn and had it there the next day. So I could finish the job on time. So it's those kinds of commitments that it takes to really, really make this happen. All right. So as I've done for the other 4 presentations, here's my contact information. Feel free to write me an email if you'd like to. Call me if you'd like to. Again, go to the Tim Fowler Show. There are many, many podcasts in there that are fabulous about all these kinds of things that we're talking about. And then if you want my newsletter, go to that link. The bit.ly links are very case sensitive, so make sure you follow all the cases in that description there. And, you know, join in the club and enjoy what we're talking about. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the share from my side, and we can certainly take any questions that you might have. And I'm fine with just opening up your mic and talking to me if you want to do that. We don't have to use the chat box.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
I want to tell you, I appreciate you giving me a valid explanation for all the tools I've purchased over the last 15 years and your discussion about having tools when you have small crews.
Yeah.
So now I can say to my wife, Tim told me it was okay.
Yeah, I'm sure that carries a lot of weight with your wife.
Well, she knows that I speak highly of you, and you've had a chance to meet and stuff.
Yeah, so I just gave you a license to buy whatever tools you want, right?
Yeah, well, that's the only reason I'm in business. I'm not really here to make money or anything.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I could help out, John.
And I broke out laughing out loud when you were talking about getting in the car and the blue tape. I said, oh, guess I won't ever do that again.
Yeah, and again, I think that's one of the most defeatist actions we can ever take, is either hand somebody blue tape or say, oh, I see a roll of blue tape over there. Just grab that and mark anything you want me to deal with. It's just, you're just inviting trouble. That's that's just trouble. So don't ever do that. And, again, do the work in such a way that they can't find anything anyway.
Yeah, that's always a good plan. And I always tell my guys that if we have something that's not right and we can't fix it before the end of the day, make sure you tell the homeowner that we know it's not right.
Yep.
So they don't come home and go, oh, that looks terrible.
Right.
We know it's there. We couldn't fix it today. We'll take care of it tomorrow.
So that's that proactive communication is part of that idea of you make lists. You make lists and you can share. Now, don't give them the list, right? Because you don't want them to have that power, I think. But you make that list and you walk them through and say, here are the things that we know need to be taken care of. And like we noticed a drywall blemish over here. We're going to get our guy back and take care of that. And I'm sure you saw there's no door stopper on the bathroom door. Well, they may not have seen it, but you're bringing it up, and we have one on order and it'll be here by the time we finish on Friday or whatever it is. And of course, having those solutions in mind is part of the trust thing that you want to develop with the client. And so the idea is you build trust all through this process. And so when it comes time for you to leave the job site, take that final check with you, then they know that, yeah, you don't have to say it. They know that you're going to be good for it in the long run. And so if something does pop up, yeah, they're good for it. We know they're good for it. And so that trust has been developed. All right.
Okay.
Anybody else? Any other questions? We got a few minutes, Ken?
We got a couple minutes. I got a video to play, but there's certainly,
Okay.
if you want to say something, or if there's any questions.
Well, I was just going to say, if anybody